June 24th, 2023. Well, I'll make a few comments about the developing coup in Russia at the end of this, but the main topic I want to talk about today is the issue that's come out with Lue Elizondo. I'll attach a link to what I'm talking about below the short version. There's a longer version too. But information has come out based on the Freedom of Information Act, which kind of goes what the internal communications was inside the DOD when Lue resigned back in 2017. And it's kind of interesting. And of course, his critics are always liking to pick up any minutia about this, or the different spins on the way it's been presented, or the idea I think is sort of along the lines of making a claim that he said something which maybe he really didn't claim, or there's misperceptions and so forth. And that also has to do with the articles that came out around that same time in the New York Times and so forth. So, at any rate, what they're basically saying in this is that the question is, was Lue really the director or the head of a study called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Technology Identification Program inside of the Pentagon during those years? And essentially, there's always been in the public comments along the lines of, well, we don't know about that, or whatever. And of course, the history of it is that originally there was a program called OSOP that was earlier than that, which was actually created by an act of Congress promoted by Harry Reid and some other senators, and got a $22 million appropriation in the budget, which was used for a study which basically started off primarily being about the Skinwalker Ranch, but also included actual UFO studies as well at other locations. So it was a much broader study of kind of things that are out there, you might call it, issues. And so that's kind of how it all started. Lue Elizondo was brought into this group as the security manager somewhere, actually probably more toward the end of the program, I think, that was funded. At any rate, it ended in 2012, largely because I think the head of the DIA had some philosophical difficulties with it, largely based on religion, I think. And at any rate, so that's kind of the way he got into it. At the end of that time, Dr. Lakatsky, I think his name is, who was the head of the OSOP program, basically asked Lue to continue the work inside the DOD to study the UFO program specifically, and nothing to do with the Skinwalker Ranch, which, as we well know, once that ended, and we all know that later on it was sold, and well, there's a TV series that's been on several years about that, so we know how that turned out. But Lue continued to work inside the DOD, simply reviewing the information reports they got from various pilots and other military personnel about various UFO, UAP, as they became called, encounters and events. And so that's how it came to be. The actual truth of the matter is that there never was a top-down program directing this continued effort. It was started from a legitimate program that was funded by Congress and was pretty much conducted, I think, on what you might call the basic overhead. I mean, as I understand it, and if I'm wrong about this, anybody in the civil service, DOD could correct me on this, but I believe it's true that these officers kind of are funded almost like what in industry would be called overhead budget. Or indirect charge rather than direct charge, meaning instead of having to, basically meticulously record every tenth of an hour to what specifically you're working on, or at least supposed to be doing that as best of your ability, right? Are you really watching your watch? I don't know. But at any rate, the point I'm getting at is that they just blanketly charge that thing, and so I think these people aren't under that kind of constraint, so they can work on what they're doing on. So one day he's told, fly down to Gitmo and interrogate a terrorist or something like that, or go over somewhere else and investigate something or other, or prepare a report on something or other for or supervisor, that sort of thing. And sometimes you have slack time. And in slack time, him and a group of people continue to follow all the intelligence that came in that would be related to UAPs. Okay, and that's really what ATIP really was. It was sort of an informal study being conducted inside the the Pentagon, and now the Secretary of Defense was not at all aware he was doing this. In fact, as he even admitted in some statements publicly, I can recall, where he said maybe even his immediate supervisor didn't really know about it. Well, now we know why. And so, but nonetheless, it was going on, and eventually, of course, we know it led to Congress getting involved in the creation of the UAP task force, and eventually the ARROW organization we have now. So, okay, so that just gives a little history there, and I have a point to be made about this. By the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like, and you can subscribe, and we'll hopefully you can forward to other people who might be interested. So anyway, okay, here's the point I'm trying to make that this illustrates. That's the same kind of thing that people are claiming about the UFO crash retrieval program that David Grusch, put out a couple of weeks ago. And I wonder how it could be that certain high-level people are unaware of it. Well, they were unaware of the smaller scale thing that Lue Elizondo was involved in until he resigned and told everybody, right? And so I think the same thing is kind of true here about this other situation to some degree. At least my theory on it is the following. Sometime in the past, probably in the late 40s, maybe after the Roswell incident or some other incident around that time, or before, or a little after, whatever, probably President Truman authorized a very top secret program to study this subject, to collect any data and information they could have, and probably to prepare, reports and studies on the subject. Okay. And this went on for several years, and at the time was fully authorized under the laws and rules that existed at that time, which, let's face it, were a lot looser than they are today. I mean, today to have a covert operation, the president has to issue a finding, and which is a classified document that authorizes it. Well, and then to bug somebody, he's supposed to get a FISA warrant from a FISA secret court. Back in those days, you didn't have to do either of those things. The president could order a covert operation on his own with no finding, and he could bug somebody and not have to go to a FISA court if it was considered national security. And that basically continued into the post-Watergate period in the 70s. So my point is that probably this thing was started during that period and was fully legal under the rubric of the time. But as time went on, probably the group, I would suspect, did two things. It probably did accumulate more evidence, more instances. People are talking now going into the low double digits of retrievals. That surprises me, but okay. But that doesn't totally shock me either. It's, because there's been a lot of decades involved in this. And I think that a lot of this work was definitely contracted out to various, contractors. I mean, I think that, for instance, in the early days, I think Battelle actually did research on the metals that were recovered, the so-called memory metals. And apparently we eventually came up and found a way to duplicate that. And it's a pretty minor thing compared to what we're a flying craft. But that was something that occurred during the decade of the 50s. So my point is that there are probably other contractors, aerospace contractors, who were given examples of this, and we're studying it. I know there was talk about getting anti-gravity somewhere in the mid-50s, and there was a lot of focus on that subject at that time, And in fact, it probably led to funding of a lot of gravity research, which really had created major breakthroughs, if you will, in mainstream science, such as all of the black hole physics. I mean, after all, the Kerr solution of the rotating black hole, which is kind of the foundation of black hole theory, was created under a government contract from, I think, Wright-Patterson in 1963. This mathematician that did it was hired by them to do this. Not specifically that, but that's what came out of the research. So when I'm getting at a lot of this, I can remember a book also from the Battelle Institute about this very subject that was I think edited by John Wheeler around that same time, like 64 maybe, when they were talking. So, so I'm getting at is that this probably did have effect on research, all of which didn't lead to anything too technological, let's say, but it did lead to a lot of pure science. However, there probably were studies that continued, and at some point, in order to maintain security, this went deeper and deeper, and eventually people in the higher offices were probably not really even read into these programs. And your typical president probably comes in, and UFOs is the last thing that he's even thinking about. I mean, was Johnson really that interested? Was Nixon? I don't know, maybe Ford. Carter was interested. We know he was interested. And we know that initially, at least until he was president, that he was rebuffed by George H.W. Bush, who was at the time the CIA director. Although we don't know how much he knew about it, but maybe we assume he did. But other CIA directors at a later time, according to Greer, were surprised about all this, as was Admiral Wilson on the Joint Staff of the JCF. So my point is, it's a real mystery as to who actually is cleared on this and who really isn't. But it's sort of the Grusch story seems to me to fit into this mold of programs that were initiated in deep secrecy and have just continued on because nobody told them to stop. And they were operating under the rules that were in effect back in the day, and apparently it never got drug in until the present time into a major congressional investigation, which is presumably these revelations may now cause. But up to now, they were pretty much freewheeling, doing whatever they wanted to do, I guess, with what budget they could skim off of other dark programs. And these things, I assume, are buried inside of other classified programs and are disguised just like the term ATIP, which doesn't scream UAP out at you to begin with, does it? And I think the same thing is probably true of how these other things have been managed over the years. And, Grusch's claim is that there was violations of federal acquisition regulations is one of the complaints he had, in addition to his own harassment charges. Well, we know that from the Admiral Wilson story, I think I might have mentioned before, that they found that at least one of the corporations that was doing work on this was actually burying the funding of it in their overhead. And that's not proper, really. It should be a direct charge project, right? But, and of course, the story goes, an auditor got into it, caused them a lot of consternations, and they eventually managed to clear the guy to shut him up. And things went on for many years afterwards until Admiral Wilson showed up, and that's the whole story came out. So the point is, I think that kind of explains what's going on. And so really, the revelations that they got from FOIA on this Elizondo thing, which was never the main program. It was just a small study being done by a few people. It didn't have anything to do with retrieving crash retrievals or anything else. At least I don't think so. It was not. In other words, I don't even think Elizondo was in the real projects, which are probably compartmented anyhow. So even if he was in one of them, he was probably only in one part of it, not the whole thing. So again, to see the concept I'm laying out here of how this is all really kind of possible. I tend to think it's a lot smaller scale than some of the big advocates think it is. Some of them imagine that we've successfully reverse engineered this technology and we've actually manufactured our own exotic craft and we're flying them routinely or something. And I doubt that for a variety of reasons. And one basic one is, how much money would that be, and how many people would have to be working on it? You need to have manufacturing people, engineers, subcontractors, and everything else to put something like that together, all of which would involve technologies we probably don't even understand, and probably based on science that we may not understand either. So that kind of illustrates at least my argument on the subject, that I think it's relatively small scale in order to keep it secret, funded by various surreptitious means, which is what's led to the current ethics complaint, and probably has been ongoing for a long time, and leadership has probably been passed down to one person to another, who are recruited somewhat the way Elizondo was recruited by Lukaski. In other words, so anyway, that's kind of, anyway, I just thought I'd run through this idea as a way to think about this subject. And we'll have to see what Congress does with the information that they now have and see if we find out anything more. So anyway, I'll end that discussion for now. And like I said before, I do understand there's some kind of the Prigozhin is launching a coup apparently in Russia as I record this, and we apparently they're in Rostov, I think, and seem to be fairly good position there at the moment. So I don't have a whole lot to say about it, because about anything you'd say going forward is speculative as to where it leads. Will this overthrow the Russian government? Will this bring down Putin? Or will it end in a civil major clash between Russian forces and Wagner? Or will it be something else? We'll just have to wait and see, and I'll probably be doing updates on this as things go forward. But that's not the main topic of this video tonight, and I just need to see more news before I have any real opinion on it. So until next time, as always, I'll be posting this on Rumble, and of course my social media account addresses are in the description below, and I may make some comments on the other subject as I learn more. Until next time.